12 hours, Greenwich Mean Time.
BBC World Service presents Radio Newsreel. First, the main points of the news. President Sadat has led thousands of Egyptians in a funeral procession through Cairo for the 15 commandos killed in Cyprus. A new effort is being made to break the deadlock at the Belgrade Conference on European Security and Cooperation. We've a report from Belgrade. The Prime Minister of Israel has said he wants to resume peace negotiations with Egypt. Our Moscow correspondent will be reporting on Soviet opposition to any such moves. Japan is reported to have rejected a new Soviet proposal to conclude a friendship treaty. The Japanese Prime Minister said the Soviet message made no reference to Japan's claim to 4 Pacific islands, an issue that has prevented any agreement in the past. Military leaders in Indonesia are meeting to discuss the political and security situation in the country. More details in a moment. But we begin our reports from the East-West Conference in Belgrade, where the delegates are continuing their efforts to end the present deadlock, which is primarily over the issue of human rights. Maurice Gent from Belgrade.
All the major Western nations, except France, have stated their common position, which has been rejected as totally unacceptable by the Soviet Union. So unless there's some last-minute concession on the Soviet side, it looks as if the 35 participating states will have to agree to the drafting of a short final document limited in scope, which the Swiss delegation is already working on. Western delegates haven't entirely given up hope, arguing that the Russians frequently offer a concession at the end of a period of tough negotiating. But even the optimists can't be specific about what the Soviets might offer. There's certainly no indication of an olive branch being offered on the human rights issue, and it would appear that the Soviet leader, Mr. Brezhnev, has accepted that the Belgrade Conference will mark a setback for his policy of détente and greater cooperation between East and West. In one exchange of remarks, the British and Soviet delegates appeared agreed on only one thing, that if Martians were taking part in the conference, there might be a greater degree of understanding. Britain's chief delegate, Ambassador Parsons, when defending the Western statement on European security and human rights, said he couldn't understand why the Russians found it so offensive. He was sure that if a man from Mars attended the conference, he would find it difficult to understand why the Russians were offended. The chief Soviet delegate, Ambassador Vorontsov, took issue with the British delegate, saying that if there was a delegation from Mars and they had studied all the conference papers from the beginning, the Martians would well understand the Soviet position. Incidentally, if a final winding up program is agreed today, the drafting of a short document could easily take another week of negotiation, if not more. Maurice Gent, BBC Belgrade.
The Soviet leader, Mr. Brezhnev, has been restating the Russian position on the latest peace moves in the Middle East. He accused Egypt of setting back the cause for peace by its overtures to Israel. He also suggested that the time had come to think again about a resumption of the Geneva Conference. Mr. Brezhnev was speaking at a dinner in the Kremlin for President Assad of Syria, with whom he had earlier begun talks. Our Moscow correspondent, Kevin Ruane.
Mr. Brezhnev seemed to be appealing to the Arab states that Moscow has backed and encouraged in their opposition to Egypt's overtures to Israel. Everyone could now see, he said, that by embarking on what he called separate deals, the Egyptian leadership had started to surrender one Arab position after another, and this had pushed back the cause of a Middle East settlement. But is it not time, Mr. Brezhnev said, to stop unprincipled maneuvers and return the cause of a settlement to the channel of the Geneva Conference? Without doubt, he said, this would serve the interests of the peoples of the Middle East and help improve international relations. The Arab countries, Mr. Brezhnev said, are at a crossroads. It's on their cohesion and determination that peace depends. Moscow has given its backing to those Arab countries who, with the Palestine Liberation Organization, met recently in Algiers to restate their opposition to Egypt's present policy. But it knows that not all of them support the Kremlin's long-standing insistence on a return to Geneva. Recent visits to Moscow by representatives of Algeria, South Yemen and Libya have produced no signs of a change in their attitude. So the talks with the Syrian president are vital if the Soviet Union is to make any headway towards Geneva. According to Mr. Brezhnev, the talks have produced mutual understanding on practically all questions under discussion. But there's no sign so far that the Syrian president is actually supporting the Soviet drive to Geneva. Kevin Ruane, BBC, Moscow.
The senior commanders of Indonesia's armed forces have begun a meeting in Jakarta to discuss the country's political and security situation. The meeting follows recent unrest and demonstrations by students and outspoken criticism of the government by some prominent public figures. Our Southeast Asia correspondent, Adrian Porter, is in Jakarta, and he sent us this dispatch.
Altogether, 238 military leaders have assembled in secret session in Jakarta's convention hall and were addressed first by the Minister of Defense, General Maraden Panggabean, who, it's understood from reliable sources, made it clear to his commanders that the situation is calm again and far from being out of hand, as some reports have had it. Officially, it has been stated that the meeting is intended to agree on action to help bring about closer unity between Indonesia's military regime and the population in general. But there have been indications that it may develop into arguments for and against the hardline policies that have so far been taken against the dissident factions, who have complained especially about the corruption that is said to be so rife in the higher echelons of the country's leadership. What is of immediate concern, however, is how to handle national security for about 2 weeks next month, when the National Congress meets to debate policy and finally to elect, or rather re-elect, the president. For so far, there have been no contenders against President Suharto, who is standing for his third 5-year term in office. During the congressional meeting, the cabinet will in effect be dismissed from office, so the country will have no nominal government, and the military's role during this period will be vital. In the West Javanese city of Bandung, where students of the local Institute of Technology staged the most militant anti-government demonstrations just over a week ago, the local army commander has denied that any students were tortured or beaten, or that any shots were fired at them by troops. The students had alleged in their university newspaper that the troops had used excessive force and brutality in clearing the campus of demonstrators.
Our Southeast Asia correspondent, Adrian Porter, reporting from Jakarta.
BBC Radio News at 9 o'clock. Egypt has withdrawn her diplomatic mission from Cyprus, and she's asking the Cypriot government to recall its representatives from Cairo. Helicopter emergency flights in the West Country have been hampered by freezing rain and fog, but now there are signs of a thaw. A British firm, Vickers, has won a £10 million contract with the Chinese aero industry. The Egyptians have shown their anger over the bloodshed at Larnaca airport on Sunday night when their commandos tried to storm the hijacked Cypriot airliner. The cabinet, meeting in Cairo, decided to withdraw Egypt's diplomatic mission from Cyprus and to ask the Cypriot government to recall their representatives from Cairo, while there's a complete review of relations between the two countries. The official announcement said the decision had been taken in view of the unfriendly attitude of the government of Cyprus towards Egypt and Egyptian citizens. Our correspondent in Cairo says the move only just falls short of a full diplomatic break. It was announced not long before the Deputy Foreign Minister arrived back from Cyprus with the bodies of the 15 commandos who were killed and with those who survived the battle against members of the Cypriot National Guard. They received a hero's welcome. The Egyptian government has awarded medals to all those who took part in the raid. So far, there's been no official reaction from Cyprus to the proposed withdrawal of the diplomats. The West Country is still struggling to recover from the blizzards of the past week. It's hoped that fresh efforts can be made this morning to drop emergency supplies of food, medicine and animal fodder to isolated communities and farms. many people still have no electricity or water. But RAF and Royal Navy helicopters are being hampered by freezing rain and poor visibility. Our reporter Peter Ruff is at RAF Chivenor in North Devon.
One of the rescue helicopters was stranded itself overnight near Exeter. It had picked up a doctor with a seriously ill patient and flown them both to hospital. On their way back to base, the weather closed in and the helicopter had to put down on a sports field for the night. Today's operations are also in jeopardy. The forecasters say visibility may be down to 50 yards in places, and if that's the case, the helicopters won't be able to fly. They also have problems with fuel. A road tanker can't get through to the station, and so a Hercules transport aircraft is being flown in with aviation fuel in barrels. The helicopters are being prepared now for several urgent flights, including one to Bradworthy near Oakhampton, where a man is reported to have been missing for some days. There are several other calls, too, for drugs and food supplies to be dropped for people who've been stranded for over 3 days.
There are signs that a thaw is beginning in parts of the West Country, but this, combined with the freezing rain, is causing new problems. Some roads that are open are icy, and in South Wales, police say that most major roads are very dangerous. The Prices Secretary, Mr. Roy Hattersley, has warned tea blenders that the government will act unless they bring down the price of tea. Yesterday, the Price Commission said the price should be cut immediately by about 5 pence a quarter, because the blenders had not passed on to consumers the benefits of a fall in world prices. At a by-election meeting at Chigwell in Essex, Mr. Hattersley said he was sure the blenders would bring down the price, but if not, the government had the power to bring it down whether the companies wanted it or not. Brook Bond, one of the big 4 companies, have challenged the Price Commission's figures, and they say that for several months the price of their tea in multiple stores has been 3.5 pence a quarter cheaper than the average quoted by the Commission. The British engineering company Vickers have signed a big contract with the Chinese to supply facilities for testing Rolls-Royce Spey aircraft engines, which are to be built in China. The deal is worth £10 million and will provide work for a number of British subcontractors. The equipment is to be delivered early in 1980. It's the second major order Vickers have won from the Chinese aero industry in less than a year. The Governor-General of Australia, Sir Zelman Cowen, has opened the new session of Parliament in Canberra following December's landslide election victory by Mr. Malcolm Fraser's Conservative coalition. In his speech, Sir Zelman said Australia would embark on a major program to boost exports and would seek increased and fair access, as he put it, to the overseas markets of the major trading blocs. He also said that as a result of the bomb explosions in Sydney last week, Australia was cooperating urgently with other nations to develop more effective means of fighting terrorism. Cricket. England are in a strong position at the end of the second day of their game against New Zealand's under-23 side. They made 310 in their first innings. The New Zealand side are 129 for 9. BBC Radio News.
That was the news broadcast at 9 hours GMT on the 21st of February 1978.